It's perhaps the oldest question of all. Why are we here? In this vast and complex universe, are we important? And it's not just a question for philosophers. Science has been tackling the question too, asking whether there is a hidden purpose to our creation. Or are we just an accident of creation?
Most scientists now believe there must have been something before the Big Bang. And understanding what that something was and how it worked is the new frontier in our quest to understand the universe. It occupies the minds of some of the greatest thinkers on the planet, and the solutions they've come up with stretch human imagination to its limits.
You have Swiss cheese, okay? Just imagine the cheesy part of it is heavy vacuum, and the universe expands, and these bubbles appear inside.
The universe is born inside of a black hole.
String theory.
M theory.
Where M stands for magic, mystery, or memory.
It's actually safe to create a universe in your basement.
The Big Bang is the aftermath of some encounter between two parallel worlds.
In this universe, there is one great energy, and we have no name for it. People have tried various names for it, like God, like Brahman, like Tao. But in the West, the word God has got so many funny associations attached to it that most of us are bored with it.
The generally pleasant position to take is that everybody has a piece of the action. You know, the Hasids know something, the Buddhists know something, the Book of Mormon, there's something there. The mushroom was incredibly ungenerous on this point. It said nobody knows jack shit about what is going on.
What happens when we die? Nobody knows the answer to this question, surely. We're all going to ask ourselves this question at some point in our lives because it's fundamental to the human condition. And it's surely a big question. Do we just stop or do we go on in some way? And we may bring to this question our religious beliefs that we may have developed as adults or that may have been drummed into us from childhood. Or science may condition our thinking on this question. Lots of different reasons why we would think about it in many, many different ways. And I'm sure there's as many different views on the subject in this room as there are people in the room. But this man, Richard Dawkins, the professor of the history of science at Oxford University, or at least so he was until recently, he knows the answer to what happens to us when we die. Because he was asked this question, how do you, talk about a leading question, how do you prepare for death in a world where there isn't a God? And he replies, you prepare for it by facing up to the truth, which is that life is what we have, and so we had better live our life to the full. I can't object to that. I totally agree. We should live this magnificent gift of life to the full. But then he says, we'd better live our life to the full while we have it because there is nothing after it. And what I want to know is, how does Richard Dawkins know that? What science is that based on? What experiment? What weighing or measuring, counting? What has Dawkins done that he knows there is nothing after death? Has he died? Been there, found nothing, explored nothing, come back, reported on it? No.
For many people, science has become a belief system, a worldview. This is sometimes called scientism, where people take the dogmas of science to be a kind of religious belief system or quasi-religious belief system. And it's this dogmatic belief system which I think is now constricting and holding science back in a very serious way. In almost every branch of science, we see the law of diminishing returns. More expensive research yields fewer and fewer really new results. And I think the reason for all that is this dogmatic belief system. If science can be set free from it, new experiments and new possibilities open up in every area.
What is this thing called death? is this widely used legal definition: complete cessation of brain function is evidenced by absence of brainwave activity on an electroencephalogram. Well, I would say we are not our brains. We are our consciousness. You know, we're not our knees either, or our elbows, or our shoulders. What we are, what all of us, every one of us in this room is a spark of light, a spark of consciousness. We are our consciousness. And yes, certainly the brain is involved in consciousness in some vital way, but it's unclear exactly how. And this was the first area that I got into trouble with TED for my brief TED Talk, which was on their website for a couple of weeks before they took it off. And I couldn't initially understand why they'd taken it off, but it later became clear that there is a faction of scientists who advised TED who belong to what is called the materialist reductionist tendency, that they believe that all phenomena can be reduced to matter, that there is nothing outside the material realm, effectively nothing that can't be weighed, measured, or counted. And to suggest that consciousness might in some way be non-local to the brain, cannot be reduced to the brain, cannot be localized to the brain, is a kind of act of heresy from the point of view of this faction of scientists, whose number is Richard Dawkins.
What I do in my book, Science Set Free, is take the 10 dogmas of institutional science, which are part of the scientific worldview, and turn these dogmas into questions, treat them not as beliefs or truths, but as hypotheses that can be tested against the evidence. I then look at them scientifically to see how well they stack up when you take into account the evidence. None of them do. And in every case, new possibilities open up. Science would become regenerated when we undergo this process.
What, if you had a skeptic in front of you,
hello,
given one chance, what would be the one study or story or area that you would give them to try and convince them?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think it's hard, but I think the thing that's, because I'm a skeptic myself, but I think I'm very open-minded to all this sort of stuff. So I think the thing that's most convincing to me is probably the life after death stuff, because there's actually scientific studies going into this, giving good evidence that there is something going on.
Dogma 8, the mind is inside the head. Mental activity is brain activity. Your mind is nothing but what goes on in your brain. Dogma 9 follows from Dogma 8. Psychic phenomena are illusory. Things like telepathy can't really happen because they would imply the mind can work at a distance from the body, and it can't do that because it's all inside the head.
We're looking at two general theories. It's a way of thinking about how are we going to explain the phenomena that people talk about. So the first theory is the one that's mainstream neuroscience. This is a nice pamphlet you can download from the Society for Neuroscience, which basically gives you the overview of the neurosciences today. The Society for Neuroscience, if you went to their annual conference, you would be joined by 30,000 other people as compared to this conference. So you can see who's mainstream. Their theory basically is that you're nothing but a pack of neurons and you're a machine made of meat. That's more or less what this says, this pamphlet. The second theory is that consciousness is fundamental in some important way. It's not an epiphenomenon, and it's probably more important even than philosophers would imagine, more along the lines of what Eastern metaphysics tells us. So those are the two dramatically different theories that we're looking at, and we're trying to figure out which one makes more sense given these phenomena that we look at. So let's first look at telepathy as a class of experiments that we and our colleagues around the world have studied. I could go through the same exercise for each one of the major classes of phenomena, but due to the lack of time, I'm just going to focus on two. So the first one's telepathy. A standardized task that has come about over the years is called the Ganzfeld task. Ganzfeld is a German word meaning whole field. And the idea is that you take the person who will be the telepathic receiver, and you put them under a red light, and then you take a ping pong ball and you cut it in half. You put the ping pong ball over each eye, and you ask them to keep their eyes open. So what you're looking at now is just a uniform red field. That's where the Ganzfeld comes from. It's a uniform field, so the stimulus in your eye is red everywhere with your eyes open. You also then have them have headphones in which they're listening to white noise, and they're sitting in a comfy chair. And after 5 to 10 minutes of this, people begin to hallucinate. If you're in the process of falling asleep, you begin to get that hypnagogic state where you get very vivid imagery. That's what this thing evokes. And the reason is that you're awake, you're sitting up, your eyes are open, you can hear stuff, but there's no pattern of any type. And so the brain gets starved for some form of information, and you begin to generate it internally. Meanwhile, we have a sender who's isolated at a distance. The sender is given something to think, and we want them to inject their thought, essentially, or their ideas into the other person's head. Here's an example where the sender might be given an image of an elephant, and that's what they're supposed to send to the receiver. The receiver, of course, has no idea what these images are. If it's done in a double-blind way, the experimenters also don't know what has been selected for the sender. So the sender is given a randomly selected image, has to send it over to the receiver, and if we're lucky, then the receiver will get something like animal and gray. The receivers are asked to both encourage them to stay awake by speaking aloud anything that comes to mind. So we call this mentation. It's the idea of taking thoughts, your cognition, and speaking it. You mentate it, and it's recorded on audio. After 20 minutes of the sending period, you take the person out of the Ganzfeld state. You play back the audio recording. And the reason why you do this is because when you're in that dreamy state, you actually are not very good at remembering what you said. It's a little bit like waking up from a dream. It fades very quickly. So this helps the receiver remember what they said. Here's an example of possible targets, and the targets includes a real one. In this case, like there's the real target, and they're decoys. And they're selected so that they're different from each other. And the task of the receiver is to select the correct one. And the chance of this design is 1 in 4. They would get it right by chance. Here's places that have done this kind of experiment from around the 1920s until today. Lots of different universities. This is what you get in terms of the hit rate. Now remember that chance is 25% on this graph. That's over here. These are the results of individual experiments, 122 experiments from 20 laboratories around the world, doing over 4,600 sessions of the type that I just described. But cumulatively, there's chance, there's a cumulative hit rate. Cumulative hit rate is about 32%. Among other things, the odds against chance of being there as compared to chance expectation is 300 trillion quadrillion to 1. That means that roughly that in a game of 1 in 4, where you're trying to choose 1 in 4, that collapses into a game of 1 in 3, 25% to roughly 32, 33%. The information's coming from somewhere. The question is where? Oh, the other thing is, when you have odds of 300 trillion quadrillion to 1, what does that actually mean? It means that if telepathy did not exist, we'd have to run this same kind of experiment 300 trillion quadrillion times to get a result as good or better than we've observed. And so if you look at the age of the universe, it would take longer than the life of the universe to get these results by chance. That's one way of thinking about, is this really as good as it appears? Probably. In fact, it would take many, many, many universes of the length that we are now in order to get this result by chance.
We mostly do not realize anymore that until 1967, only 45 years ago, all patients with cardiac arrest died because of modern resuscitation techniques like defibrillation and external chest compression were not yet available, only 45 years ago. But this patient regained consciousness after a period of unconsciousness of about 4 minutes. We as a resuscitation team were of course very, very happy. But the patient seemed to be very, very disappointed. He told me I was going through a tunnel, seeing a light and beautiful colors, and hearing music. I have never forgotten this event, but I did not do anything with it. And in that time, I did not know that in human history, the same experiences have been told in many cultures and many times and many religions. Because according to our current medical concepts, it is not possible to experience consciousness with the possibility of perception during a cardiac arrest when circulation and breathing have ceased. The idea is transformational, always causing enhanced intuitive sensitivity, profound changes in life insight, and the loss of the fear of death. In our study, about 50% of the patients with ND reported awareness of being dead or had positive emotions. About 25% of the patients had an out-of-body experience.
The first thing I remember is a woman's voice to my left saying, "I'm not getting a pulse, I'm not getting a pulse." And with the same sense of reality with which I'm now speaking, I turned to her and said, "Of course you're getting a pulse, otherwise I wouldn't be talking."
It seemed that I flew up in the air, straight up in the air, and it felt wonderful.
I felt myself kind of whoosh out of my body. Just whoop, and you're up and you're watching everything from above. I felt my whole soul with me. I could, every memory that I had for my whole life was around me like a shroud.
30% reported moving through a tunnel. About 25% had communication with the light or observed colors.
A light exploded under me, a light brighter than a million suns. This is beyond my vocabulary, especially in describing this light, because it sounds so, oh, the light, yeah.
I became aware of a bright point of light, a brilliant, tiny pinpoint of brilliant light that was 10 million times brighter than the sun. As I approached it, it got bigger and more intense and more beautiful.
If I was a Christian, I would call the light Jesus. If I was a Buddhist, I would call the light Buddha. If I was a Hindu, it would be Krishna. The light becomes what we believe, what we associate with. And that's immaterial. It doesn't make any difference what we call the light, because it's love.
About 30% of the patients had an observation of a celestial landscape or had a meeting with deceased relatives. 13% experienced a life review, and 8% experienced a border.
In front of me were these giant, titanic golden columns rising up into like Jack and the Beanstalk. Like, and they were stacked in such a way that it felt like it was a gate or an entrance to something. I was greeted by a being or a spirit. I don't know what this thing was.
He showed me instances in my life when I could have gone this way or I could have gone that way. Why did you go that way? And I had to answer for it. Some choices that I made that had hurt other people, and sometimes I didn't even know it, but he showed me that it did.
I saw myself at 5 years old. So it was my brothers and sisters, and my neighborhood friend, his name was Hadi. You know, listening to me, I don't know why, he picked up the stick and whacked the beehive, and we all took off and ran. And everyone got into the apartment buildings, and the last one to get in, to approach the door was Hadi. And I had a devious thought in my mind. I said, I'm gonna hold the door and not let Hadi in to see what happens to Hadi. And all those bees from that beehive, they stung the daylights out of Hadi. And every single bee sting I felt every sting, the burning sensations, the swelling. His mother came out the apartment building, scared, frightened. I felt all of her fear, all of her fright, all of her rage. His father came out there trying to figure out what, I felt it all, it rippled. I felt every single thing.
Well, the people that I've talked with have seen the initial stages, I think. They talk about leaving their bodies and going through a passageway into a light and seeing their deceased relatives greet them and seeing a review of their lives. But the question is, what comes next after that? And I think that probably in the world that we live in and in the minds in which we are embedded in this life and in our bodies, I think it's probably impossible for us to even imagine. And that's what people with near-death experiences tell me, that no matter how eloquent and articulate they may be, no matter how well educated they are, no matter how many languages they speak, no matter where they are from the world, they tell me the same thing all over the world. They say, I just can't describe it. that the words that we have in this light are not adequate to describe this experience.
What are those current explanations from mainstream science to explain away NDEs?
Anything they can get their hands on.
Okay.
anything that will make it go away.
Well, yeah, hallucinations is one. Drugs, DMT in the brain.
Dissociation. So as you're coming to your death, your brain can't deal with the fact that you're about to die, so it sort of hives off a piece of your mind and pretends, it basically sends you outside your body and says, no, you're going to live on. So it's like a fear-based thing, right through to probably more bizarre theories like Carl Sagan's suggestion that the near-death experience is an echo of coming out of the birth canal as a baby, going through a tunnel and seeing the light on the other side, which Bruce Grayson sort of dismisses because near-death experiences have been reported with people who were born via cesarean section. So
yeah, that answers it straight away.
Well, I was going to ask, how does Grayson and these other experts in the field, how do they feel about these explanations?
Bruce, in particular, he's really looking for the answer. He's been doing this for 30 or more years, I think, investigating this, and just none of them at the moment really answer the question. And that's what that paper he wrote goes into. I think he's very careful in what he says. He wants to be seen as investigating this scientifically. But I think my feeling was that he feels that this is probably something to do with some sort of survival of consciousness. However you want to, you say afterlife, it has religious connotations.
I would like now to discuss into more detail the out-of-body experience, OBE, during NDE. In this experience, people have theoretical perceptions from a position outside and above their lifeless body. The NDEs have the feeling that they have apparently taken off the body like an old coat. And to their surprise, they appear to have retained their own identity with the possibility of perception, emotion, and a very clear consciousness. The range of vision can extend to 360 degrees with simultaneous detailed and bird's eye views. And even people blind from birth have reported veridical perceptions during NDE and OBE. This out-of-body experience is scientifically important because doctors, nurses and relatives can verify the reported perceptions. They can also corroborate the precise moment the NDE with OBE occurred during the period of CPR. In a recent review of about 100 corroborated reports of potentially verifiable out-of-body perceptions during NDE, Jan Holden has found that about 90% were completely accurate. 8% contained only some minor error, and 2% was completely false.
People reporting that they felt their thinking was clearer when they were in the out-of-body state. They were suddenly, their consciousness had expanded to indescribable heights. And yeah, they don't want to get in their body. It's almost as if that's the ultimate state of being human. And everything else, this physical reality, is like a filtered down version. I kind of like that concept.
You start getting into religious sort of feelings there, and you start tiptoeing around because people are saying this is the state you want to be in, and you start worrying about what people might do to achieve that state.
Yeah, right.
Let's all rush off to that when, again, this is probably, no beliefs here. So
yeah, there's no guarantee, so don't go and jump off a bridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Then we have all this other stuff. The ghosts, the spirits, the near-death experience. What about reincarnation? What about Ian Stevens' work at the University of Virginia? 15 years trying to disprove reincarnation. At the end of the day, he has to conclude the only way he can explain the evidence is that reincarnation occurs. Well, reincarnation can't occur if your brain makes consciousness. It can if your brain is manifesting consciousness temporarily.
I think in a recent survey by Peter Fennick, he found that 60% of palliative carers and physicians reported end-of-life experiences and deathbed visions in their patients. So, it's a massively common thing, and yet we hardly ever hear about it.
Exactly. I found that to be truly incredible, and it was something that I really hadn't heard before, was also these cases in which palliative carers had seen where a person who was approaching death, but they didn't even realize, were almost straddling the line between this world and the next, and they were communicating quite well with the people here, and yet they were communicating with other people on the other side that were guiding them through. I find that truly amazing.
Yeah, I was amazed by that too. There's just sort of that, turn one way and talk to dead grandma on this side, and then turn to the left and discuss then winding up your affairs and getting your will sorted and things like that. They're sort of living in two worlds at the same time.
And yet you had a number of cases which provide excellent evidence for the possible reality of these experiences, when the visions included family members that the dying person believed were still alive, but were in fact dead. They just hadn't received the information yet. I think that was really compelling.
I'm going to explain to you what's known as the central mystery of quantum mechanics. It was Richard Feynman, the American physicist, said, this is the central mystery of quantum mechanics. There's lots of weird stuff that goes on in the quantum world. Hit you with this, and it basically tells you what it's all about. It's called the two-slit experiment. Well, so imagine we have an atom gun, something that can fire atoms, a stream of atoms. You can't see them because they're very small. Let's block off one of the two slits. And so far, so good. Nothing strange here. So the atoms are arriving as these little pinpricks of light that we see. Of course, a lot of the atoms will be blocked by the first screen. They won't go through that slit. But those that do get through to the other side, you can see there's a bit of spreading of the atoms. But if we didn't know anything about atoms, we'd say, well, that's fine. We can understand that. A lot of the atoms are going clean through the slit. Some are sort of maybe bouncing off the edge of the slit, and so they're sort of being deflected a bit, which is why you get a bit of a spread. The first mystery of quantum mechanics comes when we open the second slit. Because now we see something that's very much like the interference pattern we got with light. Rather than having two bands of spots where the atoms have gone through the two slits, it's as though the atoms have gone through the slits behaving like waves. So you put a detector just above the upper slit that will flash or beep whenever it sees an atom go through that top slit. Sure enough, you fire the atoms through, one at a time. 50% of the time, the detector will beep. The other 50% of the time it doesn't, the assumption being that the atom has gone through the lower slit. But of course, I've been cheeky here. I haven't shown you the results of the experiment. That's what you get. 50% of the time, it beeps, and you see a spot arrive adjacent to the upper slit. The other half of the time, it doesn't beep, but you see a spot arrive at the lower slit. So, yeah, it's picked out the atoms that have gone through the upper slit and not the ones that have gone through. So each atom does go through one slit or the other. But that's a different result to what we had earlier. So here's the last bit of sneakiness that we can play with atoms. Surely now, we're going to get to grips with it. Leave the detector there, but just very quietly go and unplug it. Don't let the atoms know that you're not spying on them. Make them think that you're still detecting them. So, yeah, okay, we're going to run the experiment. Atoms, okay, get ready, one at a time. We're going to be checking on you. All right, so run the experiment again. Now, if you can explain this using common sense and logic, do let me know, because there's a Nobel Prize for you.
Quantum physics, it's amazing the range of opinions on that. Some
of course,
will come straight out and say consciousness has nothing to do with quantum physics. You've got the many worlds interpretation is really taking over these days, and it seems that the great thing about many worlds to a lot of quantum physicists, I think, the great thing for them is that it deals away with consciousness,
right,
as far as they say, because they say when quantum collapse comes, instead of your consciousness causing this collapse and making reality appear, instead what happens is two universes, if you say yes or no, two universes hive off. One is one where you said yes, one is one where you said no.
Yeah, I love
this
that.
Just happens. Every decision you make another universe hives off, basically, and you just have an infinite number of universes for every decision made. And
that's a very messy universe.
iPad mini or iPad regular?
Exactly. There's just stuff everywhere. It's a mess. I don't like that idea. It's not clean enough for me.
I love the fact that quantum physicists or other scientists are so keen to do away with the spiritual side or a consciousness side to things that they'll take on this model where every decision you make creates an entirely new universe. I think that's just
it's a cool concept, though.
But I also like that you brought up the concept of Occam's razor.
Yeah.
It's used all the time. It's to pick the simplest explanation. And as you were saying before, when you add up all these elements, all this evidence, whether it's the NDEs, the veridical OBEs, the deathbed visions, all that stuff, Occam's razor is that consciousness exists after physical death. I mean, for me, that is the logical conclusion.
Me too.
That is now logical once I've seen the information.
I can, as a reasonable person, accept that consciousness survives death. Bravo, hooray. But right beneath that are the really important questions. And what are people supposed to do about those questions? I mean, it's not just a matter of, consciousness survives death, so let's save the planet and recycle. Those aren't the questions that people have.
Of course, why
they
not?
Have deeper
but
questions.
That's why I wrote the final section of my book. The final section of my book is titled, What the Dead Say. So once I've convinced people that the dead have in fact survived and are indeed communicating through gifted human mediums, then I discuss what they say. And it's really those messages, I suppose, which are sources of wisdom and optimism. And I don't think there's anything particularly horrific in there. There's nothing about eternal hellfire. It does. The dead do say that the old saying, "What we shall sow as we reap," that has truth to it. But they also say there's no eternal hellfire. They talk about a gradual process of development on the other side. Many of us will return to this earth to reincarnate.
As a traditional psychotherapist, Dr. Brian Weiss was astonished and skeptical when one of his patients began to recall past life traumas that seemed to hold the key to her recurring nightmares and anxiety attacks, ostensibly the reason for her being there. His skepticism was eroded, however, when she began to channel messages from the space between lives, which contained remarkable revelations about Dr. Weiss's family and his own dead son.
I always wonder, what is the first? How do you start? Where do you start? But with that question also comes, and a lot of people wanted to know this, is where does it end? Is there ever a point where we stop having reincarnations of any sort?
I should also mention, Bob, that the answers that I'm giving you are my answers. They're what I think, and they may not be the only answer. It may be very incomplete. It's sort of like the old fable about people feeling the elephant and then being asked to describe the form and shape of the elephant. And those people who are trunk people are going to react differently from the people who felt the tail or the back or the leg, and they're going to have different descriptions, and yet it's just one elephant. So I'm giving you my opinions and what I've learned from all these years in doing my research, but there may be other ways of looking at these questions and other answers that contain a great deal of truth also.
Sure.
So, in my way of what I felt and learned is that eventually we do end when we don't have to come back here anymore. It would be kind of like going through school. And let's say some of us are in the 2nd grade and the 8th and the 5th and high school, but eventually we all graduate and don't have to come back to this school anymore if you consider the earth a school. So when you graduate, that means you've learned enough of the lessons not to come back here. Maybe there are higher dimensions or levels where we keep learning, evolving along our spiritual progress back.
Okay, individual consciousness evolves toward lower entropy, and I'm going to equate lower entropy with higher quality, more spiritual states. Now, I've added a bunch of new words. So lower entropy means a high quality consciousness, and in more common terms, it's a more spiritual consciousness. And that's because the next sub-bullet there is love is the nature of a low entropy consciousness. And a lot of people ask me questions about that. Now, how is it again that you associate low entropy with love? You know, that seems to be a hard one, so we'll do that one again. Okay, let me posit two different groups of beings. One group we'll call utopia, and in that group, in the utopian group, all the beings in this group are going to be caring. It's about other, love, helping. They're all cooperative. You know, it's all that's sort of a mind frame. And in the group called hell, they're all self-centered. It's what about me? It's not about other. And we're going to take these two groups and we'll have equal numbers of both. Let's say we have 10,000 utopians and 10,000 from hell, and we're going to put them in an environment. We're going to put them in this bubble, and they'll have a certain amount of resources and a certain amount of time to do whatever they do with those resources. Okay, it's going to be a sociological experiment. So we do that, and what would you expect to happen? Well, the group that is based on cooperation and helping each other out is going to eventually optimize themselves within their resources. The whole group will end up optimizing. Those who have good talents will use those talents, and those that maybe are just labor, they will be the labor. You know, everybody will work together. And the group in hell, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to fight with each other. They're going to try to steal each other's stuff. Each one wants to know what's in it for them before they give anything. How much am I going to get? And if they're not going to get more than they give, they're not going to do it. What happens there is eventually they form up into power groups. Somebody who's better at getting will get more, and the more power they have, the more power they can get. The more you got, the more it's easier to get, and you will end up with power groups. But it won't be just one, it'll probably be several, and those several will all fight with each other.
At any rate, if we want to know what happens after death, the very last people we should discuss this with are materialist scientists, because they say, quite simply, nothing happens after death. End of story. There's nothing more to discuss. I think it's interesting to look at the views of wise ancient civilizations like the ancient Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians, after all, put their best minds to work for 3,000 years on the mystery of life after death. They didn't put their best minds to work on making computers or soap powder or cars. They put their best minds to work on what happens to us when we die. And they came to very definite and specific conclusions. When you enter into the Hall of Ma'at, which is also called the Judgment Hall of Osiris, your life has been your opportunity to prepare for this really scary and worrying moment. The goddess Ma'at wears the feather on her headdress. That feather symbolizes cosmic justice, truth. And we see it again in these scales here. There's the feather of Ma'at, and in the other scale is this little symbol, which represents the soul of the deceased. So your soul is being weighed in the scales against the feather of truth and cosmic justice. And up here, here's the 42 negative assessors in the Judgment Hall of Osiris. Why are they called the negative assessors? Each of them is going to ask you a question. Did you kill? Did you steal? Did you bear false witness? Actually, all of the 10 commandments are there, and 32 others as well. And ideally, in a perfect world, you should be able to answer no to all of those questions. But the ancient Egyptians understood that we are frail, that we are fragile, that we make mistakes. There's room in the ancient Egyptian system. There's room in a human life to learn from our mistakes and not to repeat them, ideally, to learn our lessons as we go through life. I often think that the ancient Egyptians looked at the human life rather like a work of art, rather like a sculpture. We would work on this sculpture. We would get whatever we got. Might be 20, might be 50, might be 70, might be 90 years, who knows how long, to work on the sculpture that is our lives. We would make mistakes. but we would chip away and try and fix those mistakes, make things better, improve them, so that the object being at the end of it, that you should be able to stand back and look back on the long course of your life and say, yes, I did go wrong there, and I did make that mistake, but I put it right. And by and large, on balance, at the end of it all, I did good. You know, you were given this incredible opportunity to be born in a human body. The whole universe worked to that end, to allow you to be born in a human body. You were there to do something. Did you get it? Did you get what you were there for? And it's that revelation that is really the point of all this. The moral behavior is necessary but not sufficient. You need to get the point of your life.
What is an incentive, a motivator for making the best choices you can from the big picture that you describe?
Okay. Well, first of all, we'll go back and restate the idea that the reason we're here, we are consciousness. We're individuated units of consciousness. We're experiencing this virtual reality that we call our physical universe, so that we can have experience that gives us choices, which allows us to grow up, become love, increase the quality of our consciousness, decrease the entropy of our consciousness. Okay, this is our purpose for being here, is to evolve. Why do we want to evolve? Because if we don't evolve, we'll de-evolve. You can't stay the same. It's a large, complex system, this larger consciousness system, and it has two choices. It can evolve or it can de-evolve. So it evolves or dies. Here you are, a unit of consciousness. Your mission is to evolve. And you don't want to. I don't want to evolve. That's a lot of work. I just want to drink beer, watch television, and, get out of my life. I'm happy the way I am, sort of thing. Why should I worry about choices? I'll do whatever I damn well want, and everybody else can just deal with it. They can evolve and deal with what I want, That's just ego talking, obviously. And what's the downside of that? What do you get for that? Your punishment for de-evolving is de-evolving. You see, that's your punishment. You're not really punished in the sense that some other being comes out and whacks you on the backside or locks you in a jail or puts you in hell, lets you burn, or all these things are basically fear-based things to help organizations manipulate people. But what happens is if you de-evolve, you don't evolve. Okay, you say, well, that's not so bad. I don't need to evolve, I'm happy the way it is. I'm rich, I got a lot of money, I can boss people around and whatever. Well, it's like this. Here we are in this learning lab. It's very much like we're in kindergarten. So here we are in kindergarten. Teacher comes around, we take crayons, we draw big stick figures and this sort of thing. That's kind of the level we are here. And we spend a whole lifetime here in kindergarten. And then we get old and we transfer to, we get out of this particular experience packet. But we haven't learned much, so we get another experience packet and we try again. And we spend that whole lifetime in kindergarten. We just draw pictures of stickman and, that kind of thing. And we throw spitballs at the other students. We steal their toys, We spit on the floor, we do all that kind of stuff. And we get another life packet. And, gee, we stay in kindergarten. We throw more spitballs. Well, you see the point of this? Okay, here you are now. Add all your lifetimes and you're 3,000 years old. You're still in kindergarten, drawing pictures of stick people and throwing spitballs. All right, what's wrong with this picture? You're saying, what's the deal here? What's the punishment? The punishment is you're still in kindergarten. You see, you're still acting like an idiot in kindergarten. You're still throwing spitballs, spitting on the floor, pulling the little girl's hair, the pigtail in front of you, and you're not learning, you're not growing. And this school that we're in doesn't pass you along because you're a year older. This school you're in passes you along when you grow up, when you increase the quality of your consciousness. So you may have had 1,000 lifetimes and you're still throwing spitballs and pulling little girls' pigtails. You see? That's the problem. You're not growing up. You're not helping grip an oar and row the boat. You're a drag on the rest of us, you see. Well, what happens to you when you're playing your Sims, your World of Warcraft, and you've got a player, and that player just can't evolve? Now, what does evolve mean in World of Warcraft? It means collect hit points or go up levels, you see. It's that sort of thing. And you can't get this elf to go up a level to save you. You know, every time he gets in a scrape, somebody, kills him, or he gets hurt, or he runs away, or something. You just don't find this character to be very useful. Well, what happened? You stop playing him. You're not happy throwing spitballs. You're not happy just jerking little girls' pigtails. It amuses you for a while. You're not happy being rich, collecting a lot of, getting all the marbles. You're not happy bullying other people and stealing their chocolate milk at lunchtime, Yes, that's fun for a while, but then it gets old and it's just nowhere, and you get very unhappy. Your life is miserable. And because you're miserable, people around you are miserable. And you're all miserable together, and you make something that looks a whole lot like, a weekday afternoon soap opera. Happy is a byproduct of a life well lived. That's happy. It's not something that you force the world to give you. It's not something you can buy. It's the product of a life well lived. If you don't live your life well, if you don't make good choices, you won't find happiness, even if you do find money.
I think you illustrated that point really, really well.
Did we get that? Did we drive that one home?
I think.
I'm wondering, and I have always wondered, if there's such a thing as getting off the reincarnation wheel, or, like it or not, are we stuck doing this until we get it right? Is that really I guess, is that the answer you'd give, that you are stuck with it and you could fail the fourth grade 100 times and you'd still have to keep going until you made it through?
Right, but eventually you're going to make it through. And that's the key to it. We're all going to graduate. And there are other schools, other dimensions. So it's really not so onerous. It just means you get more than one chance to get it right. And then you graduate. You move on to the higher levels of consciousness, to the higher dimensions.
Not be just limited to this physical reality. Travel beyond it. You see, there's a whole bigger reality here. Mastering this physical reality is just step one. Then you can go on beyond that. I mean, it's not the limitation of just being, okay, I'm a cool dude in physical reality, I've made it. That's not it. There's lots of growth past this little virtual reality game. There's lots of other things to do and become. You need to become love. You see? So there's no end to the process. The larger consciousness system is still evolving. It's not like it's a fixed target. It's not like, oh, well, I'll just get to this point and I'll be done. There won't be anything else for me to learn. There's always more for you to learn. The system is learning. The system is growing. You're part of a living, growing system. How positive you are has a lot to do with your reality, has a lot to do with what you run into. You ever know anybody who was just really negative about everything? Oh, woe is me, everything happens to me, my life sucks, and so on and so on. Most of those people, their life sucks. They're right, but they're creating that to a large extent. And if you ever run into people who are just up, they're just bubbly all the time. Oh, yeah, my mother just died, but, she was ill for a long time. It was probably a good thing because she was suffering. And everything, they find the silver lining in every issue. They're always bubbly. They're always happy. They are happy. It's because everything's positive. Their life is good. You see? So you create your own reality in many ways. The thing is, this is a model. Okay? What I've produced is a model of reality. What's unique about it and interesting about it, I think, is that it's a logical process model. It talks to the left brain people in the world. Mm-hmm. It talks to all the mechanics and the scientists and the engineers and the lawyers and the doctors and everybody that does logical process, for a living. And that's the way they think. All those left brain people right now are out there with nothing that they can connect to. There's tons and tons of right brain type things about spirituality and about reality models and that sort of stuff. They're all poetical.
I just want to mention this briefly because fear is one of our greatest difficulties and obstacles and blocks. Love dissolves fear. Understanding dissolves fear. This is one of my tasks in going around the world, teaching in these workshops or writing books. It's to help people get rid of fear. Fear is the great block to our inner peace and joy and happiness. It blocks us along our spiritual growth and our journey. And so how do you get rid of fear? Well, you understand your real nature. Your real nature, the nature of your mind, is immortal, eternal. And I've said this before, but we'll just remind everyone again of the quote of Teilhard de Chardin, that you are not a human being having a spiritual experience, but a spiritual being having a human experience. The nature of your mind, the real nature, is immortal, eternal, spiritual. You're not your body, you're not your brain. When you see yourself in terms of countless lifetimes of a spiritual being who is immortal, eternal, who never dies because you're never really born. You existed before physical birth, you'll exist after the death of your body. You are the spiritual consciousness, the being, the soul, whatever you want to call it, that goes on after the death of the body. Then you begin to realize you have nothing to fear.
Don't believe me, please. Okay, that's a strange thing to say, right? Whatever I tell you, don't believe it. Whatever I tell you, don't disbelieve it. Believing or disbelieving is irrelevant. It just doesn't get you anyplace. Okay? Remain skeptical, but remain open-minded. Open-minded skepticism is the only thing that can ever take you anyplace important.
So it just feels to me that mankind is obsessed with not just being here for a given period of time and looking for some sort of deeper, more meaningful purpose. And because of that, you look for other reasons and other, whether it's religion, whether it's, reincarnation, because no one wants to believe that they have 70 years on the planet and then they degrade and nothing else becomes of you. So it just feels a little bit like you're, I wouldn't say clutching at straws, but looking for answers to avoid just being, faced with this very bleak alternative.
Sure, no, I understand that. I would actually put it the other way around, and I would say that the person who says and passionately believes that there is nothing beyond this life, and when we die we're just dead and they're meat, that I would say they're actually clutching at straws, because that's a really hopeful and positive position to have. Much more worrying to have the notion that every action, every thought, every second of your life counts in the much longer term, and that the mistakes and errors that you make in this life may not just be wiped away
echo in
with
eternity,
your death,
as it were, yeah.
but may have massive implications for you throughout eternity and infinity. I mean, to me, that's actually not a comforting idea at all. That's an extremely worrying idea, and it's one of the ideas.
But doesn't that sound like a bit like religion?
Well, yes, of course it sounds like religion. Where do you think religions come from? I mean, religions come fundamentally from visionary experiences. Moses in front of the burning bush, St. Paul on the Damascus Road, the Prophet Muhammad shivering in his cave, meeting the entity that he construes as the angel Gabriel. You scratch any of the big monotheistic mainstream religions, and you'll find shamanistic experiences in altered states of consciousness right there under the surface, of course overlaid in subsequent years by layers of bureaucracy and power-hungry priests and rabbis and mullahs who've imposed a social structure upon it. But the essential experience is an experience of altered states of consciousness. And
what are some practical things that we can do on a day-to-day basis to have our thinking be such that we can be on an optimal path, on the optimal track for ourselves?
Do you understand the whole concept of why it is important to act on your highest excitement every moment? Hesitation usually means no.
No.
All right. That's your answer. So if you always act on the thing that contains the most excitement at every given moment to the best of your ability with zero expectation as to what the outcome ought to be, you will be walking the optimal path no matter how it looks.
So the system is actually trying to help you. And it can do that if you're open to the help. If you're not open to the help, then there's no point. because if you're not open to the help, why would it bother? You know, it's not going to do you any good. But if you're open to the help and you say, gee, that was really amazing, that, you know, look at this line of incidents that happened to me. I just went to here, to here, to here, and then bingo, there I was. That's hard to believe that that was just, you know, random. And it could be random. You know, it could just been luck the way it played out. But it doesn't have to be. You see, there is a possibility that the system can manipulate those things to nudge you. Now, it can't make choices for you, but it can give you opportunities to make good choices, to see things, to look at a bigger picture. If you'd majored in English instead of, you know, physics, you'd be somewhere else. So that's the way it is. We have all these choices, and that's kind of like this Brownian motion. You bump here, which bumps you there, and then you just happen to run into somebody who moves you in that direction, and then some other direction, and we just bump around. And all that bumping around produces lots of choice. We're always getting a whole new array of choices. Every choice we make sets us up with more choices.
Really think about what really is important. You know, is it the money? Is it the dollar? Is it the big car? Is it the $1 million home? It isn't any of that. It's our family and it's our friends. We don't need all this crap. We just don't. You know, what's important is who we are. Where are we going with ourselves? Have people looked inside themselves and said, you know, I do all this work, I support all these other things and all these other people. Am I actually fulfilling what I want to do? Am I, in fact, following my passion? Am I truly happy with my effort and what I've done? You know, have I made any difference whatsoever in what's going on here in the world? Now, if you can be a clerk in a 7-Eleven and say, yeah, this is my life's fulfillment, well, bully for you. Great. But I know that in actuality that's far and few in between. People really need to start evaluating and get extremely creative and figure out what is it that they can do to fulfill themselves, to fulfill their dreams, to at least know what those dreams are and start going after it. Ultimately, when you come right down to it, the question that has to be asked is, who am I? What is it that I want? What is it that I'm creating? What is it that I want to create? You know, how much am I actually valued by myself, my family? Am I loved? Am I respected? Am I following my heart's desire? Am I spiritually evolving? Or am I just on this automatic treadmill that the media and the Earth's religions have put us on?
I don't buy the idea that, you know, the society the way it is right now, it has to be this way. Someone's always going to have to work at Burger King. Someone's always going to have to. I don't buy that. I think people are pretty fucking flexible. If you look at the broad spectrum of humans and human behavior from different cultures all over the world, it's pretty obvious to me that there's a lot of different ways that people can act. We don't have to have fast food workers. We don't have to have people who work shit jobs. We don't have to. We just need to figure out how to restructure society so everybody somehow or another plays a part, has something to contribute, has something to share. I mean, that's what a real society is supposed to be like. I give you some coconuts, you give me some fish. You know, we make a deal, and you do it back and forth and left and right. And when there's nothing to contribute, then you start looking, the president needs to give us jobs. We need jobs. So instead of something to contribute, you just find something to do with your time. And then it becomes about doing that more than it becomes about finding something to contribute. So society gets wrapped around becoming a part of a machine. Society, instead of becoming a bunch of individuals that are expressing themselves in unique ways, and everybody sort of borrows and shares and sells this and you sell that, and we all sort of figure out how we can contribute in a society, we got sidetracked and diverted into these boxes that they call companies and corporations, and we got stuck into these containers, they go cubicles or offices, and we got forced into this system. So our time, instead of it being invested in making pottery or fixing cars or doing something where you have a passion or you have some sort of a connection to, instead of that, you've sold your life to sit in a box and work for a machine, an uncaring machine that demands productivity. It doesn't understand you. It doesn't want to understand you. It has a bunch of very strict things in order to keep the humor at a minimum in the office, just in case one of you fuckheads says some stupid sex jokes that gets them sued and they have to give somebody $1 million. So get it together, and this is your life now. No natural behavior. Everybody's wearing clothes they don't want to wear. Everybody's showing up and doing something they don't want to do. They have no connection to. That's the problem with our society. And then what's the reward for all this stuff? Go home, get a big TV. Go home, you're going to get a shiny belt buckle. You're going to get a nice purse. You're going to wear shoes that you couldn't afford last week. You're going to get that dream car. And every week we're chasing down this new object. And every week we're trying to fill this hole in this sad shadow of a life that we've been left with after work.
We have things upside down. We can't even solve the problem of hunger and the abomination of what is happening in the Amazon. This is, again, a sign that our society has lost contact with its sanity, that we as a global community can stand by as this precious resource, this unbelievable home of biodiversity. The Amazon rainforest is literally destroyed as huge areas are cut down and replanted as soybean farms to feed cattle so that we can eat hamburgers. I mean, what a ghastly mistake we are making to allow that to occur for a moment. And part of it, a large part of it, is driven by economic need of the peoples in the Amazon basin countries. This leads to the slash and burn and to the destruction of the rainforest. It would be possible as a global community to say to the peoples of the Amazon region, look after the rainforest and we will make it worth your while. We will make it worth your while economically to look after the Amazon rainforest so that there's no need ever to cut down another tree. But we've never been able to do that. We can invest countless billions, trillions in warfare, in hatred, fear, and suspicion. We never have a problem in raising money for that. But to raise the relatively small amounts of money that would be needed to make it economically viable not to destroy the Amazon rainforest, that we've never been able to make that choice.
Is it true you don't even vote?
Yeah, no, I don't vote.
Well, how do you have any authority to talk about politics then?
Well, I don't get my authority from this pre-existing paradigm, which is quite narrow and only serves a few people. I look elsewhere for alternatives that might be of service to humanity. Alternate means alternate political systems.
They being?
Well, I've not invented it yet, Jeremy. I had to do a magazine last week. I've had a lot on my plate. But I say, but here's the thing it shouldn't do. Shouldn't destroy the planet. Shouldn't create massive economic disparity. Shouldn't ignore the needs of the people.
If we're going to move on out of this dark place, and the world is in a very dark place right now, and horrendous things are happening all over the world, we're not going to solve those problems by pretending they don't exist.
You don't believe in democracy. You want a revolution, don't you?
The planet is being destroyed. We are creating an underclass. We are exploiting poor people all over the world. And the genuine, legitimate problems of the people are not being addressed by our political class.
All of those things may be true.
They are true.
But you took... I wouldn't argue with you about many of them.
Well, how come I feel so cross with you? It can't just be because of that beard. It's gorgeous.
It's possibly because...
And if the Daily Mail don't want it, I do.
And what I've been told by Amazonian shamans when I've asked them what's wrong with us in the West, they say it's really simple. You guys have severed your connection to spirit. If you don't reconnect with spirit, you're going to bring the whole house of cards down on your own heads and on ours.
But what I'm saying is that within the existing paradigm, the change is not dramatic enough, not radical enough. So you can well understand public disturbances and public dissatisfaction when there are not genuine changes and genuine alternatives being offered. I say when there is a genuine alternative, a genuine option, then vote for that. But until then, don't bother. Why pretend? Why be complicit in this ridiculous illusion?
Because by the time somebody comes along you might think it worth voting for, it may be too late.
I don't think so, because the time is now. These movements are already occurring. It's happening everywhere. We're in a time where communication is instantaneous, and there are communities all over the world. The Occupy movement made a difference, even if only in that it introduced to the popular public lexicon the idea of the 1% versus the 99%. People for the first time in a generation are aware of massive corporate and economic exploitation. These things are not nonsense, and these subjects are not being addressed.
It might be a familiar progression.
transpiring on many worlds. A planet newly formed placidly revolves around its star. Life slowly forms. A kaleidoscopic procession of creatures evolves. Intelligence emerges, which, at least up to a point, confers enormous survival value. And then, technology is invented. In a flash, they create world-altering contrivances. Some planetary civilizations see their way through, place limits on what may and what must not be done, and safely pass through the time of perils. Others, not so lucky or so prudent, perish. This is one reason that in the long astronomical perspective, there is something truly epical about now. This is the first moment in the history of our planet when any species, by its own voluntary actions, has become a danger to itself, as well as to vast numbers of others. We humans have already precipitated extinctions of species on a scale unprecedented since the end of the Cretaceous period. But only in the last decade has the magnitude of these extinctions become clear, and the possibility raised that in our ignorance of the interrelations of life on Earth, we may be endangering our own future.
The second dogma is the total amount of matter and energy is always the same, except at the moment of the Big Bang when it all appeared from nowhere. Then the third dogma is similar to that. The laws of nature are fixed. The laws and constants of the world are the same today as they were at the moment of the Big Bang, when they all suddenly appeared like a kind of cosmic Napoleonic code. As Terence McKenna used to say, modern science is based on the principle, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. And the one free miracle is the appearance of all the matter and energy in the universe and all the laws that govern it from nothing in a single instant. So the principles of conservation of matter and energy were built into science from the outset, not on the basis of detailed measurements. They've served as useful accountancy principles ever since. But they were formulated more rigorously in the mid-19th century in the law of conservation of matter and energy and in the first law of thermodynamics. So it was assumed that that was the end of the matter and that they were fixed forever. And most people take that for granted today. They've learned it in high school and they never see any reason to question it. This was the dogma of science which I myself didn't question until quite recently. I'd questioned all the others, but it was only when I was writing this book that I thought I should look at this one. And I actually rather wanted it to turn out to be true, because I thought if I said that all 10 dogmas of science were false, it might sound a bit biased. So I thought it would be quite nice if one of them held up. And I thought this was the best candidate. But when I thought about it, it turned out to be a shambles. First of all, physicists are above the law, and they've found themselves quite free to invent or hypothesize forms of matter and energy that which no one had ever thought of before. One of them is, of course, dark matter. Observations of galaxies and the way that stars moved within them, and also the ways that galaxies interact with each other, suggested that the galaxies, if they were to be explained in terms of gravitation, simply wouldn't work. The whole thing simply didn't work. So in order to make it work, they hypothesized there was extra matter, which you can't see, hence the name dark matter, that accounted for all the phenomena of galaxies and their interactions. Well, how much dark matter was there? Well, simple. Just invent the exact amount you need to explain the observed phenomena. You can titrate the amount of dark matter at will to explain the phenomena you're trying to explain. If you find new phenomena, peculiar bulges in galaxies or something that one-size-fits-all dark matter won't explain, then you add a bit more where it's needed. The system works perfectly, and you can explain everything with complete accuracy because you can change the amount at will. The only trouble is no one knows what it is, and there's no independent evidence for it. People have been speculating about its nature ever since it was first postulated. having created all this extra matter in the universe, then this meant there should be more gravitation. And physicists expected in the 1990s that the universal expansion from the Big Bang would slow down, the universe would stop expanding, then begin to contract under the influence of all this gravitational matter, until it ended in tears, in the reverse of the Big Bang, known in the trade as the Big Crunch. So when in the late 1990s people observed that the universe appeared to be accelerating because of red shifts in distant quasars and so on, in galaxies, then there was the problem, how do you explain this acceleration? Well, the answer was ready to hand, a new form of energy no one had known about before, which caused the universe to expand. How much is there? Well, just the right amount to explain the facts. So we now have dark matter and dark energy as huge amount of the universe. They currently make up about 96% of reality. Now, physicists have invented something like 20 times more energy and matter than anyone had ever heard of till the 1980s. And no one's said, oh, you can't do that. It's defying the law of conservation of matter and energy. And if you ask, is all this matter and energy conserved? Is the total amount always the same? Well, for dark matter, nobody knows. For dark energy, the most usual theory is that actually the amount's increasing. As the universe expands, there's more dark energy. The universe is now a perpetual motion machine.
Now, dark matter, dark energy. We don't know what dark matter is. It's 85% of the gravity of the universe is dark matter. Is something we don't know what it is. So we just call it dark matter. We don't know what. The universe has some pressure in the vacuum that's making it accelerate in its expansion against the wishes of gravity. We don't know what that is either. We call that dark energy. This sounds like we know something. We don't. I could call this Fred and Wilma, okay? It doesn't matter. We are dumb stupid about what these two things are, all right? Now, normally that's not a problem, like, until you look at this chart, okay? So everything we know about the universe, what we're made of, galaxies, stars, planets, that's all right here. His net worth is like $50 billion, plus or minus. I don't know if you know how much that is. I don't believe you know. You don't. In fact, I'm certain you don't, because I'm going to tell you. I will tell you how rich this man is. First of all, I'm charmed by the fact that the patron saint of geeks is the richest man in the world. That's a different world than it was when the richest people were sort of oil barons and steel barons. It's like a geek is the richest guy in the world. That's kind of cool. But $50 billion, I did this math because I walk along the street. You know, I have a job and I own a home, and I'm walking down the street and I see a coin in the street. My question to myself is, what is the smallest denomination coin that I'll bend down and pick up? Okay? Given the fact that I have a job, I own a home. So, the penny is staying. I'm not getting the penny. The nickel, no, I'm not getting the nickel. Dime, if I'm not in a hurry, I'm picking up the dime. Okay? A quarter, well, that's good for parking meters and laundry. Plus, it's a quarter, right? So I'm picking up the quarter. So for me, the boundary between picking up the coin and not is between a dime and a quarter. So I figured, let me ratio this up to that wealth and ask, how much money has to be laying in the street for Bill Gates to be too busy to pick it up? It's $45,000, okay? That's what it is. $45,000, I said, too busy. Somebody else get that. Do you realize that in 1 linear centimeter of your lower colon lives and works 100 billion microbes, which is a bigger number, about the same number, as the total number of human beings who have ever lived. That's what's going on in your lower intestine. So we have billion, trillion. What's the next number here? Quadrillion. Someone said zillion? No, almost. Quadrillion. That's about 100 quadrillion is the number of sounds and words ever uttered by all humans who have ever lived. So these numbers are getting really huge, really fast. Billion, trillion, quadrillion. What's next? Quintillion. There's one of my favorite numbers. About the number of grains of sand on an average beach. Million, billion, quadrillion, quintillion, sextillion. A 1 with 21 zeros. Of what possible significance can this number have? That is the estimated number of stars in the universe. Stars in the universe. Some people, this depresses them. Among them, this gentleman, a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. We opened a space show 11 years ago that was a zoom out from Earth. And Earth shrunk down, and the solar system shrunk down, and it just became one of the stars in the background field. Then our whole galaxy shrunk down, and it was just one of countless other galaxies in the universe. He saw that space show. I am assistant professor of social cultural psychology, University of Pennsylvania. I want to conduct a research project in collaboration with the planetarium. My research focuses on the psychological experiences associated with feelings of insignificance. I'm thinking, damn, bummer of a job. I recently saw the space show at the planetarium, and needless to say, it was the most dramatic elicitor of feelings of smallness and insignificance that I have yet encountered. He wanted to conduct a survey. I'd be grateful if we can conduct a simple questionnaire survey at the planetarium. They want to interview people going in and then coming out of the space show. I submit to you that if you go in feeling large and come out feeling small, it meant you went in with an ego unjustifiably high to begin with. The problem is not in the universe. The problem is within you. That's what I submit. This is our nearest large galaxy called the Andromeda Galaxy. It happens to be among the stars of the constellation Andromeda. That fuzzy spiral contains 400 billion stars. These other stars you see in the picture are sitting on our nose in our own Milky Way. It's as though we're looking past a screen door through the void of intergalactic space to another galaxy. If you pull out the power of the Hubble Space Telescope and say, I'm not going to look at this big galaxy, I want to look at an uninteresting corner of the dark night sky and show me what's there, this is what shows up. This image has 3 stars in it that happen to be sitting on our nose. Every other smudge, every other shape in this image is an entire galaxy, from nearby to the distant universe.
For all our failings, despite our limitations and fallibilities, we humans are capable of greatness. What new wonders, undreamt of in our time, will we have wrought in another generation, and another? How far will our nomadic species have wandered by the end of the next century, and the next millennium? Maybe the time is not quite yet, but those other worlds, promising untold opportunities, beckon. Just now, There are a great many matters that are pressing in on us, that compete for the money it takes to send people to other worlds. Should we solve those problems first, or are they a reason for going? Our planet and our solar system are surrounded by a new world ocean, the depths of space. It is no more impassable than the last.